Brenda Jensen's words, sharp and sudden, cut through the quiet hum of the dishwasher. I curse you and your stupid startup. I hope they reject you. She slammed the front door, the vibration rattling the cheap champagne flute in my hand, leaving me exposed at my own dining table, the unlit candles on my birthday cake mocking the silence. A moment later, her car roared to life, tires spitting gravel as it peeled out of the driveway. I sat at the dining table, the single glass of champagne, sweating on the polished oak. The cake, a modest chocolate affair from the grocery store, bore 24 unlit candles. 38 years. Brenda had bought it this morning, before the argument, before her words had cut deeper than any knife. My name, Owen Miller, was scrawled across its top in white frosting, a reminder of a celebration that would not happen. The silence in the house, now that her car was gone, felt heavy, like a blanket soaked in ice water. 7 days. That was all the time I had left until the pitch to Sequoia, the venture capital firm that held Neuroch's future in its hands. It was everything. All the sleepless nights, the second mortgage on this house, the endless cups of lukewarm coffee, the deferred dreams. Everything came down to this pitch. Brenda's voice still rattled in the air, a ghost in the otherwise empty kitchen. I curse you and your stupid startup. I hope they reject you. I brought the champagne flute to my lips, draining the last of the dry, expensive liquid. We had bought it months ago, back when the Jensen account seemed a sure thing, back when we planned to toast a new beginning. Now it was just a bitter taste, an echo of what we had once shared. 8 years. That's how long it had been since I first saw her across the crowded campus cafeteria at Stanford. Brenda Jensen, with her piercing green eyes and a stack of law textbooks that reached her chin. She'd been arguing a point with a professor, her words precise, her logic like a surgeon's scalpel. I'd introduced myself later, drawn in by her intensity. We talked for hours, mostly about my half-baked ideas for an AI that could learn and adapt, not just follow rules. She listened, her mind already dissecting the legal implications, the ethical challenges, the potential market. I don't work for people, Owen Miller, she'd said, those green eyes fixing on me. I partner with them. 18 months later, we stood in a small hovel exchanging vows. She was my rock. Through the lean years of bootstrapping Neuroch, through the rejections and the ramen noodle dinners, Brenda had been there. Her legal background, her sharp mind, had navigated the early incorporation, the patent filings, the endless paperwork. When we finally landed our first $2 million seed investment, she'd squeezed my hand, her voice a fierce whisper. Your dreams are my dreams now, Owen. We're building this empire together. But empires, I was learning, were not built overnight, and the foundations had begun to crack. The sleepless nights for me became lonely nights for her. The second mortgage meant our savings dwindled. Just until we secure this next round, I'd promised, each time pushing the idea of children further down the road to a future that felt perpetually out of reach. 2 years ago, the Series A funding round fell short. The market had shifted. Brenda, practical as always, had suggested we look into acquisition offers. It's a good exit, Owen. We could finally breathe. I had shaken my head, too stubborn, too confident in the IPO plan. This is bigger than that, Brenda. This is about changing the world. She'd just murmured, plans change, her voice quieter than usual. Lately, she'd been talking about her colleagues more, specifically Karen and Steve Johnson. Steve, an accountant for a regional firm, owned a modest house in the suburbs, a reliable sedan, and a 401k that grew steadily. Brenda would mention them almost casually, usually after another late night, for me, another canceled dinner. Karen and Steve went to Door County last weekend, said it was nice, just a quiet getaway. The words weren't a criticism, not directly, just facts, laid out like stones in a path I wasn't walking. The argument had started innocently enough over dinner the night before my birthday. I was upbeat, almost buoyant, about the Jensen account. I really think this is it, Brenda. We close this, and it's the momentum we need for Sequoia. She'd just pushed her fork around her plate, her expression tired. It's always just around the corner, Owen, but we never seem to turn that corner. This time is different. I insisted, my voice louder than I intended. She looked up then, her green eyes dull. Steve Johnson, he doesn't have to keep telling Karen that this time is different. He also has a 401k that doesn't keep his wife up at night. The comparison stung. I didn't realize you'd become so materialistic, I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. They hung in the air, sharp and ugly. Brenda's face tightened. She put down her fork, the metal clinking against the ceramic plate. I'm talking about stability, Owen, she said, her voice low, strained, about being able to think about starting a family, about not waking up every morning wondering if we're going to lose everything. The days after my birthday stretched long and quiet in the Palo Alto house. Brenda was staying with her sister in Walnut Creek, a fact relayed to me in a clipped text message on Monday morning. The bed felt too big, the silence in the evenings too loud. I tried to focus on the pitch, forcing myself to review slides, fine-tune algorithms, and rehearse my delivery. But my mind kept returning to the empty chair across the dining table, to Brenda's last words, to the chasm that had opened between us. I called her, twice on Monday, once on Tuesday. The voicemails were awkward, stilted. Brenda, it's Owen, just checking in, thinking about you. Each time my phone would buzz a few hours later with a text. I'm fine, busy, talk later. Or, still at Jen's, need more time. No emotion, no hint of reconciliation. Just cold digital detachment. At Neuroch, the air was thick with expectation. 7 days had become 5. Gary Peterson, my co-founder and head of engineering, caught me staring blankly at a whiteboard full of market projections. You're off, Owen, he said, his voice quiet, not accusatory. The team feels it. Is everything all right at home? I just nodded, pushing a hand through my hair. Just pre-pitch jitters, Gary. I'll be fine. But I knew I wasn't. My focus was fractured, splintered into 1,000 pieces of doubt and regret. That night, I stayed late. The office was mostly empty 9, save for a few dedicated coders. Sarah, a junior developer we'd hired 6 months ago, was still at her desk, headphones on, debugging a tricky piece of code. She was young, fresh out of Berkeley, with a quiet competence that belied her age. When she finally took off her headphones and stretched, catching my eye, I found myself walking over to her desk. Still here, Sarah? I asked, leaning against a cubicle wall. She smiled faintly. Almost got it. Just one last bug trying to hide from me. We talked for a bit about the project, and then, without really intending to, I started talking about Brenda, about how things had changed, how she used to be so supportive, so energized by the vision. It's like she's a different person sometimes, I heard myself saying, the words tumbling out, laced with a surprising amount of pain. All this, all of Neuroch, it's taken so much from both of us. Sarah just listened. She didn't offer advice, didn't judge. She just looked at me with an empathy that felt like a cool cloth on a fevered brow. It sounds like you've been through a lot, she said softly when I finally trailed off. Building something great, it always costs something. Her words were simple, but they landed with a surprising weight, acknowledging the struggle without minimizing it. It was a stark contrast to Brenda's recent resentment, to the way she saw only the cost, never the potential reward. The next day, my phone rang. It was Brenda. My heart gave a stupid, hopeful lurch. Brenda? Owen, I need to talk about the mortgage payment. It's due on the 15th, and I haven't seen the transfer from the joint account. Her voice was flat, devoid of warmth, not angry, just businesslike. She then moved on to an upcoming legal brief she was working on for a client, needing some documents from the home office. Her cold efficiency hurt more than any shouting match ever could. It solidified the distance, turning our relationship into a transaction. I found myself working later and later. The empty house, with its reminders of what we'd lost, held no appeal. The office, with its fluorescent lights and the quiet hum of servers, felt less lonely. Sarah was often there too, finishing up her work or just taking a break. We'd talk about the future of AI, about her own aspirations, about trivial things. Her quiet support became a balm, a gentle counterpoint to the constant thrum of anxiety. Midweek, we had a crucial investor meeting with a smaller VC firm, a warm-up for Sequoia. It went poorly. Their questions were pointed, their skepticism palpable. I left the meeting feeling the weight of potential failure crushing me, a tangible ache in my chest. Back at the office, I found Sarah still there, drawing diagrams on a whiteboard. It didn't go well, I confessed, my voice barely a whisper. The fear was raw, exposed. She turned, her marker still in hand. Sometimes a bad meeting is just a bad meeting. Owen, it doesn't mean the vision is wrong. Don't give up now. Her words again were simple, direct. They held no pretense, just earnest belief. Later that night, an email from Brenda landed in my inbox. Subject, financials. It was a detailed breakdown of our dwindling cash reserves, the looming second mortgage payment, and a sharp, concise paragraph suggesting I consider an acquisition now before the Sequoia pitch. At least then we'd have something concrete, she'd written, instead of risking everything on a long shot. I stared at the screen, then at my phone where a text from Sarah had just popped up. Got the bug fixed. Feeling good. Hope your evening improves. A dangerous flicker, a mix of resentment towards Brenda and a yearning for escape, sparked in my eyes. The days bled into each other, the line between professional camaraderie and something else, something dangerous, blurring with Sarah. Late nights at the office became shared takeout meals, cartons of lukewarm Chinese food eaten at our desks while the rest of the building slept. Then came the shared silences, comfortable rather than awkward, followed by a slow unraveling of confidences. She told me about her own struggles, a long-term relationship that had ended abruptly a few months prior. He just didn't see me anymore, she'd said, her voice small, tracing the rim of her coffee cup. I was just part of the furniture. Her vulnerability, unadorned and direct, made me feel less alone, more understood. I, in turn, found myself talking more about Brenda, painting a picture of a wife who had grown cold, consumed by materialism, by a desire for a life I couldn't yet provide. I spoke of her complaints about money, about the Johnsons' steady 401k, about her impatience. I carefully omitted my own part in the erosion of our marriage, the promises I'd broken, the children I'd postponed, the constant chasing of a future that kept receding. Sarah listened, her gaze unwavering, her sympathy a warm blanket. One particularly brutal night, 2 days before the Sequoia pitch, we were the last ones in the office. A critical bug had cropped up in the core algorithm, threatening to derail a key demo feature. We'd been staring at lines of code 4 hours, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, the quiet tension in the room almost suffocating. We were tired, frustrated, and the clock was ticking. I finally leaned back in my chair, running a hand over my face. I don't know, Sarah, I admitted, the words barely a whisper. I'm scared, this whole thing. If this pitch fails, it's not just Neuroch. It's everything, Brenda's respect, our future, everything. The fear was a cold knot in my stomach, growing tighter with each passing minute. She looked at me, her eyes, usually bright with concentration, soft now with something akin to pity. She reached out, her hand gently covering mine, which was still resting on the keyboard. You're not alone in this, Owen, she said, her voice low, steady. The touch was a jolt. A sudden electric warmth spread through my hand, up my arm, a feeling I hadn't realized I'd been starving for. It was a physical connection that felt alien and familiar all at once, something I hadn't felt from Brenda in years. For a brief second, a flicker of warning, a picture of Brenda's weary face flashed in my mind. I started to pull my hand away, a brief internal conflict raging, but then the profound loneliness, the crushing weight of expectation, won out. My gaze met hers, held, and then I leaned in, slow, deliberate, and kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of passion, not really. It was a desperate grab for comfort, a silent plea for understanding in the face of overwhelming pressure. Her lips were soft, yielding, and for a fleeting moment, I felt a strange, fragile peace. The next morning, a heavy, leaden guilt settled over me as I drove the empty streets to work. The memory of the kiss, still vivid, tasted of betrayal. But underneath the guilt, a strange, unexpected sense of relief bloomed. A part of me felt lighter, as if a long-held emotional burden had momentarily lifted. The sheer aloneness that had been my constant companion for months had, for a few moments, receded. Brenda's text came as I was pulling into the parking lot. Have you decided about the acquisition offer? Jen needs to know for the legal brief. Her tone was flat, devoid of emotion, a stark contrast to the quiet intimacy of the night before. I avoided Sarah at work. I buried myself in my office, pretended to be engrossed in market analysis, refused to meet her gaze across the open plan space. I tried to act as if nothing had happened, as if the kiss was a figment of my tired imagination. But the tension between us was palpable, a live wire strung taut across the office. Late that afternoon, she found me by the coffee machine. "Owen," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "do you regret it?" I gripped my coffee mug, my knuckles white. "My marriage is complicated, Sarah," I said, deflecting, avoiding. I didn't look at her. I knew I'd crossed a line. Regardless of what happened with Neuroch, regardless of the pitch, the IPO, the success, or failure, my marriage, my life with Brenda, had just reached a point of no return. The weight of that knowledge was almost as heavy as the pressure of the upcoming pitch. The day of the pitch dawned gray and still, mirroring the emptiness inside me. I had barely slept. The image of Sarah's face, then Brenda's, then the looming figures of the VCs flashing behind my eyelids. Brenda had not returned. Instead, an email from her lawyer, a polite but firm inquiry regarding our marital assets, had landed in my inbox late the previous night. It was a cold, formal announcement of what I already knew. The end. I walked into the sleek, modern offices of Sequoia Capital, the weight of Neuroch's future and my marriage's collapse pressing down on me like a physical burden. The polished floors and hushed tones of the reception area seemed to amplify my own internal turmoil. Gary Peterson, waiting for me in the conference room, took one look at my face, his brow furrowed with concern, a silent question in his eyes. He saw it, the unraveling. I just gave him a weak smile. I launched into the presentation, the slides crisp, the data points meticulously researched. But my usual passion, the raw energy that typically fueled my every word, was replaced by a strained desperation. My voice, usually clear and confident, felt brittle, on the verge of cracking. I spoke of market disruption, of artificial general intelligence, of changing the world, but the words felt hollow, echoes in a vast, empty room. The VCs, a panel of 5 sharp-suited individuals, were receptive but cautious. Their questions, when they came, were precise, probing. They wanted to know about our runway, our burn rate, our contingency plans. They asked about scalability, about competition, about my leadership. I answered technically correctly, but I could feel a subtle shift in their demeanor, a sense that something was off. During a short break, I stepped out into the hallway to grab a glass of water. Sarah was there, standing by the window, gazing out at the Palo Alto skyline. She turned, caught my eye, and offered a small, supportive glance. I avoided her gaze, focusing instead on the condensation forming on my water glass. The guilt, sharp and unwelcome, pricked at me. Back in the conference room, as we moved towards the Q&A, Mr. Davies, the lead investor, leaned forward. His voice was calm, almost conversational, but his eyes were shrewd. "Owen," he began, "we invest not just in technology, but in people, in founders who can weather storms, who have stable foundations. Can you tell us a little about your personal support system? Your home life, for instance?" The question caught me off guard, a punch to the gut. My mind raced, searching for an acceptable lie, a plausible evasion. I stammered, My home life is complicated, but it doesn't affect my commitment to Neuroch. My focus is entirely here." I could feel the judgment in the room, a subtle shift, a tightening. I hadn't just stumbled, I'd fallen. The pitch concluded without a definitive answer. Mr. Davies offered a polite smile. "Thank you, Owen. This was very informative. We'll deliberate and get back to you within 48 hours. The words were standard, but they hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that I hadn't delivered my best, not even close. I returned to the empty house, the silence deafening. A stark contrast to the buzzing energy of the VC firm, the champagne bottle still on the kitchen counter from my birthday seemed to mock me with its unbroken promise of celebration. I picked up my phone. Brenda, I needed to talk to her to somehow salvage something, anything. Her sister answered. Hello? Jen's voice was clipped. Goes cool. Jen, it's Owen. Is Brenda there? A pause. A sigh. No, Owen, she's not. She also asked me to tell you that she won't be coming back home. Ever. The line went dead. I stared at my phone, the screen still lit. Then a new message popped up. A text from Sarah. Thinking of you. Whatever happens, you're brilliant. In that moment, staring at the twin confirmations of my undoing, I understood. I hadn't just risked everything for my dream. I'd risked it for a fleeting, dangerous moment of comfort. A desperate escape from the very silence I now found myself trapped in. The price felt immeasurable. A week crawled by. The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon, exactly 7 days after the pitch. It was Mr. Davies. His voice was polite, regretful. Owen, we've deliberated. While Neuroch shows promise, the current market conditions, coupled with, well, what we perceive as leadership instability, mean we cannot proceed with the investment at this time. The words were a cold, clinical execution. Neuroch was dead. I called Gary Peterson. He listened, silent, for a long moment. I'm sorry, Owen, he finally said, his voice heavy with disappointment, but not surprise. I sensed you weren't all there these last few weeks. His words were a mirror, reflecting my own failure back at me. I found Sarah at her desk, typing. I stood there for a moment, gathering my thoughts, the weight of the rejection settling heavier on my shoulders with each passing second. Sarah, I said, her name feeling strange on my tongue. She looked up, her expression expectant, but also wary. Neuroch didn't get the funding, and what happened between us? It can't continue. This is on me. My marriage is over, but it's over because of what I let happen, not because of you. She looked hurt, her gaze dropping to her hands. I understand, Owen, she said, her voice quiet. You were vulnerable. We both were. Her understanding, while a small relief, did little to alleviate the crushing guilt. 2 days later, the official divorce papers arrived. Brenda had wasted no time. Citing irreconcilable differences, the document was a stark, legalistic end to 8 years. Her lawyer initiated discovery immediately, requesting all financial records, communications, and property inventories. It was in this meticulous process that the first cracks in my carefully constructed facade appeared. Brenda's lawyer, thorough and detached, found a casual text exchange between Sarah and me. Nothing explicit, just a series of late-night messages, checking in, offering encouragement, far too intimate for a professional relationship. It was enough to raise a flag. Brenda, needing to retrieve some personal belongings, her grandmother's antique tea set, photo albums, some specific legal texts, returned to the house one afternoon while I was at work. She moved through the rooms with a quiet precision, gathering her life. On my bedside table, tucked behind a lamp, she found a small silver earring. It was a delicate stud, a design she didn't own. She picked it up, her fingers closing around the cold metal. Later that week, while sorting through boxes in the garage, a neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, walked by, pruning roses. Oh, Brenda, honey, I'm so sorry about everything, she said, her voice dripping with misplaced sympathy. But you know, I saw Owen with that young woman from his office a few times after you left. Always late, seemed very comfortable. I just thought you should know. Brenda didn't need to piece it together. The text messages, the earring, the neighbor's unwitting confirmation. It all clicked into place with a sickening thud. The anger, which had been a low, persistent thrum since the startup's failure, now erupted into a searing, all-consuming rage of personal betrayal. My phone rang. It was Brenda. Her voice, when she spoke, was ice cold, shaking with a barely controlled fury. So, she said, the word drawn out venomous, while you were building an empire, you were building something else. Weren't you, Owen? Someone else? I was cornered, exposed. The shame washed over me, a hot tide. Brenda, I'm sorry, I whispered, the confession tasting like ash. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness. Her voice hardened further, cutting through the line like a razor. A mistake? Owen, you didn't just fail your company. You failed us. You failed me. And you did it with a junior developer. How poetic. There was a pause, a moment of profound, chilling silence. You won't have an empire left to stand on when I'm done with you. I'll make sure of it. I hung up, my hand trembling. The full weight of my actions crashed down on me. Not just the professional failure of Neuroch, but the personal, moral wreckage I had created. The divorce proceedings would be brutal, a public spectacle. My reputation, already damaged by the failed startup, would be utterly shattered. This wasn't just the end of a dream, it was the end of a life. Life's costly choices, aren't they? Stick around to the end to see how they truly unfold. The divorce proceedings were relentless, a grinding machine designed to strip me bare. Brenda's lawyer, a formidable woman with a reputation for merciless efficiency, systematically targeted every Neuroch asset, every shred of marital property. The second mortgage, once a calculated risk for an investment in the future, became an albatross around my neck. The revelation of my affair, confirmed through the lawyer's discovery, added a moral dimension to the legal battle, painting me as not just a failed entrepreneur, but an unreliable, unfaithful husband. It wasn't about money anymore, not entirely. It was about principle. At Neuroch, the atmosphere was funereal. Without the Series B funding, layoffs became inevitable. Gary Peterson, with a grim set to his jaw, was forced to take the lead in restructuring, making the difficult calls, cutting the team. My role, once the visionary founder, had withered to a minor peripheral position. My grand ideas, my world-changing algorithms, were now just footnotes in a failing company's final chapter. The vision was a distant, mocking memory. Brenda, with her deep understanding of law and contracts, was dismantling my financial standing piece by piece. There was no sentimentality, no mercy. Every joint account was drained, every asset scrutinized. I had to sell the Palo Alto home, the place where we'd built so many dreams. The second mortgage devoured most of the equity, leaving me with little. I moved into a small, rented apartment in a less desirable part of town. The walls were thin, the carpet stained, a stark contrast to the sun-drenched rooms and polished oak of our Palo Alto home. It was just a space, devoid of warmth, devoid of history. My parents in Ohio called, their voices a mixture of concern and confusion. "Owen, what happened? Why is Brenda divorcing you? Is the business okay?" How do you explain ambition, neglect, a momentary lapse in judgment, a shattered dream to people who still saw you as their bright, hopeful son? I mumbled vague generalities about stress, about differing priorities. Their silence on the other end of the line was more eloquent than any words. One Saturday, I ran into Karen and Steve Johnson at the grocery store. I saw them first, pushing a cart overflowing with family-sized portions. Steve's hair was neatly parted, his polo shirt pressed. Karen wore a sensible cardigan. Our eyes met for a fleeting second. They offered a quick, tight-lipped smile, then politely averted their gaze, pushing their cart swiftly past me. The sting of their judgment, unspoken but palpable, was sharper than any shouted accusation. They were the embodiment of the stable, predictable life Brenda had yearned for, the life I had scorned. The whispers in Silicon Valley, once about my potential, now followed my spectacular fall. I was the cautionary tale, the founder who flew too close to the sun, the husband who lost everything. The ecosystem, so quick to embrace success, was equally quick to discard failure. Then Sarah left Neuroch. She approached my desk, her face pale. "Owen," she said, her voice strained, "I can't do this anymore. It's too much. The atmosphere, everything. I'm sorry." She packed her few belongings into a small box and walked out, leaving me truly alone in the decaying shell of my company. I spent my evenings in the sterile confines of my new apartment, the hum of the refrigerator, my only companion. I reflected on my ambition, a relentless beast that had consumed me, devouring every aspect of my life. It had led me to neglect Brenda, to push her away, to scoff at her need for stability, and then, in my profound loneliness, it had led me to betray her. One evening, sifting through an old box of documents, I found a letter. It was from Brenda, written shortly after we moved to Palo Alto, filled with her neat, looping script. It spoke of hope, of our shared dreams, of building a future together, of an empire. The paper felt thin, fragile, like the dreams it contained. The weight of my choices pressed down, suffocating. The price for my moral failings, for my relentless pursuit of an elusive dream, was now undeniably clear. I didn't just lose Brenda. I lost Neuroch. I lost the house. And more than anything else, I lost the man I thought I was, the man she had once believed in so fiercely. Months later, the hum of fluorescent lights replaced the dynamic buzz of server rooms. My hands, once guiding complex algorithms, now stacked boxes in a warehouse or sorted parts in a small auto repair shop. The world of AI startups, the promises of disruption and innovation, felt a million miles away. It was a mundane, temporary existence, a way to keep myself fed and clothed, while the remnants of my former life were systematically dismantled. Neuroch, I heard through Gary, was struggling, a ghost of the company we had started. Gary, with his quiet resilience, was doing his best with a skeleton crew, trying to keep the lights on, but it was a losing battle. The dream was slowly bleeding out. The divorce was finalized in the quiet, merciless efficiency of the legal system. Brenda's lawyer had left me with significant debt and almost nothing else. The Palo Alto house was gone. The second mortgage had eaten up what little equity remained. My small share of Neuroch, now worthless, was irrelevant. I was left with a scattering of personal effects, a car, and the crushing weight of my mistakes. California, the golden state that had promised so much, now felt like a prison of my own making. It represented both my greatest dreams and my most spectacular failures. There was nothing left for me there. I packed what little I had into my beat-up sedan and drove cross-country, east, back towards the flat, familiar landscape of my childhood home in a small Midwestern town in Ohio. The drive was long, the miles a blur of asphalt and regret, the cornfields stretching endlessly to the horizon. The quiet towns with their single stoplights and aging main streets felt both comforting in their familiarity and suffocating in their sameness. It was a return to ground zero, to a life I thought I'd escaped. I moved back in with my aging parents. They offered quiet support, a warm bed, and home-cooked meals, but their disappointment hung in the air like a persistent autumn fog. They didn't ask probing questions anymore, not directly, just a sad shake of the head, a worried glance across the dinner table. "You're still young, Owen," my dad would say, his voice rough. "You need a reliable Jeep." I took on odd jobs, fixing leaky faucets for neighbors, painting fences, helping out at the local hardware store. Working with my hands, feeling the ache in my muscles at the end of the day, was a stark contrast to the intellectual battles I had once waged. There was a simple, uncomplicated honesty to it, a direct correlation between effort and outcome. I avoided contact with anyone from my past life. Brenda, Sarah, even Gary. The silence felt like a protective shell. Then, one quiet afternoon, while I was replacing a broken window pane for Mrs. Jenkins down the street, my phone rang. It was Gary. His voice was tired, resigned. "Owen," he said, "it's over. We're shutting down Neuroch. Officially. The creditors are circling, and there's nothing left." The finality of it hit me harder than I expected. I had already lost so much: my marriage, my home, my reputation. But the death of Neuroch, the dream that had started it all, felt like the closing of a coffin lid. The last flicker of hope, the ghost of what might have been, was extinguished. That evening, I sat on my parents' old porch swing, watching the sunset over the endless fields. The sky was painted in hues of orange and purple, vast and indifferent. The emptiness I saw stretching before me, out into the horizon, mirrored the emptiness inside. I thought of Brenda, of her piercing green eyes, her sharp mind, her unwavering belief in me. I thought of the family we never had, the life we were supposed to build, the empire we were going to conquer together. There was no grand gesture of revenge from her, no triumphant gloating, just the quiet, persistent grind of life continuing relentlessly, without my grand vision, without my presence. The morality of my choices, the immense price I had paid, now felt less like a dramatic, climactic event and more like a permanent internal scar. A quiet wound that would never fully heal, Always there, a reminder of what I had sacrificed and what I had truly lost. A year blurred past, marked by the slow rhythm of the seasons in the Midwest. I had settled into a quiet, anonymous life, working at the local hardware store. My days were filled with stocking shelves, mixing paint, and helping customers find the right bolt. The smell of sawdust and fresh lumber replaced the metallic tang of electronics and stale coffee. Silicon Valley, the startup world, Brenda, they rarely occupied my waking thoughts. But like ghosts, they lingered, just beyond the periphery of my vision, waiting for an opportune moment to reappear. That moment came on a warm Saturday afternoon at the annual town fair. The air buzzed with the laughter of children, the scent of popcorn and grilling bratwurst. I was walking by the Ferris wheel, a bag of roasted peanuts in my hand, when I saw her. Brenda. She was standing by a game booth, holding a young child's hand, a kind-looking man with a gentle smile beside her. The child, a little girl with bright eyes and a shock of red hair, was clearly theirs. Brenda wore a simple sundress, her hair tied back, a lightness to her step I hadn't seen in years. She looked up then, her eyes sweeping across the crowd, and our gazes met. Across the distance, through the noise and the sea of faces, a moment of intense, shared history passed between us. I saw no anger, no accusation in her green eyes, only a profound sadness, and perhaps a distant, quiet understanding. It was a look that acknowledged everything that had been and everything that would never be again. My breath caught in my throat. I quickly turned away, my heart hammering, and walked deeper into the fair, losing myself among the throngs of people. I didn't want a direct confrontation, couldn't bear it. From the periphery of a cotton candy stand, I watched them. Brenda laughed at something the little girl said, her head thrown back, a genuine, unburdened laugh. The man, her partner, put a hand on her back, a gesture of quiet affection. She looked happier, more at peace, the relentless pressure visibly gone from her shoulders. The sight of her with a family, something we had talked about, postponed, and ultimately lost, was a fresh wound, a deep, aching void in my chest. A pang of regret, so deep it was almost physical, twisted inside me. I thought of the what if. What if I hadn't been so consumed by Neuroch? What if I had listened to her, truly listened, to her yearning for stability, for children? What if I hadn't sought solace in Sarah's brief, dangerous comfort? The questions were relentless, without answers. I realized then that Brenda's revenge wasn't some grand, deliberate plan, but simply her moving on. She had rebuilt her life, found the stability and the family she yearned for. She had found her peace in a way I hadn't. I walked home alone, the sounds of the fair fading into the quiet hum of the Midwestern evening. The image of Brenda, her partner, and their child was seared into my mind. A permanent brand. The Midwest, which had offered me refuge from my shattered past, now served as a constant, quiet reminder of everything I had irrevocably lost. I started to write, not code, not business plans, but reflections. I bought a cheap notebook and a pen and filled pages with my thoughts, trying to make sense of my tumultuous journey, my consuming ambition, my spectacular fall. It was an attempt to understand, to process, to perhaps even forgive myself. I wondered if this quiet, introspective life, this constant looking back, was my true pay the price. A solitary existence, forever marked by the irreversible choices I had made, a perpetual state of reckoning. Life in the Midwest continued, a steady, unassuming current. I kept working at the hardware store, learning the names of regulars, understanding the particular needs of this small community. It wasn't the life I had envisioned, but in its quiet routine, I found a hard-won peace. I started volunteering at the local community center, helping seniors navigate basic computer literacy, teaching them how to send an email, how to video call their grandchildren. Felt remarkably fulfilling in a way that building complex AI had not. It was a tangible connection, a simple act of service. Humility, a concept entirely alien to my aggressive Silicon Valley persona, had become a quiet companion. One afternoon, I sat at the public library computer and sent a brief, anonymous email to Gary Peterson. No return address, just a simple message. Hope things are well, Gary. Thinking of you. It was a quiet closure, a final acknowledgement of a dream we once shared. I often thought of Brenda's words now, her yearning for stability and family. What I had once dismissed as materialistic or small-minded, I now understood as fundamental human needs. The desire for a steady home, for the secure rhythm of family life, for a future that wasn't always just around the corner. Those weren't trivial desires. They were the anchors I had thoughtlessly cast off in my pursuit of something abstract and grand. I acknowledged with a sober clarity that sometimes pricked like a thorn, that my ambition, while genuine, had also been a form of escapism, a way to avoid confronting the simpler, more complex realities of a relationship, the daily give and take, the sacrifices required for true partnership. It was easier to build an empire of code than to build a stable home. The rhythm of small-town life became a comfort. The genuine interactions, the lack of pretense, the way neighbors looked out for each other. It was a grounded reality, far from the fleeting promises of venture capital and the cutthroat competition of Silicon Valley. One evening, I sat in my small apartment, looking through an old shoebox of photographs. Pictures of Brenda and me, young, hopeful, from our Stanford days. Her bright eyes, my confident smile. We had the world at our feet. I accepted the loss now, the betrayal, the consequences of my actions. There was no blame left, no lingering anger, just a profound, quiet understanding of how I had arrived at this place. The sadness remained, a dull ache in my chest, a permanent phantom limb of a life that might have been. But it no longer consumed me. It was a part of me, but not all of me. I had learned that paying the price wasn't always a dramatic explosion, a sudden fall from grace, but often a quiet, lifelong reckoning. I started a small garden outside my apartment building. A patch of neglected earth I cleared myself. I tended to it with care and patience, coaxing life from the soil. Tomatoes, bell peppers, a few rows of lettuce. Watching the tiny sprouts emerge, nurturing them through the summer, it was a quiet, profound act of creation. I realized that true success wasn't always about empire building or revolutionizing AI. Sometimes it was about building a life, even a simple one, with integrity, with connection, with genuine purpose. Tending to the earth, feeling the soil beneath my fingernails was a form of rebuilding. The last scene was me, outside my apartment, kneeling in the dirt, carefully watering a row of young tomato plants. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the small garden. I was a man stripped bare of his former ambitions, his grand dreams, but I was finding meaning in the soil, in the quiet growth of green things. I was still marked by the past, a mosaic of choices and consequences, but no longer defined solely by my failures. Slowly, patiently, I was cultivating a new, quieter form of hope. I was alone in the quiet Midwestern apartment, the scent of fresh earth from my small garden clinging to my clothes. The past few years had stripped away everything I thought I wanted, everything I thought defined me. Neuroch was gone, a distant memory of ambition and hubris. Brenda had moved on, built the life she'd always deserved, a life of stability and family, far from my chaotic dreams. Looking back, her curse on my birthday, her wish for my failure, wasn't malice. It was desperation, a desperate plea for a different future, one where I valued her and a shared life over the pursuit of an abstract empire. I had dismissed her concerns as materialistic, but they were the bedrock of a stable human existence, needs I had carelessly trampled underfoot. The choices I made, the betrayals, the relentless pursuit of a vision that ultimately blinded me, had led me here. To this quiet town, to this unassuming life, to a daily reckoning with the man I had become and the man I still hoped to be. There was no grand redemption, no sudden reversal of fortune, just the slow, patient work of tending a small garden, of finding meaning in the simple, tangible acts of living. The price had been paid, and the lessons were hard-won, etched into the very core of my being.